Hello, and thanks for your interest in the City of Lafayette's short-term rental zoning and licensing project. The city is considering changes to our zoning regulations to address short-term rentals in Lafayette. This video will provide a short introduction to the project. We'll cover who's involved, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how to get involved. So first, what is a short-term rental? Generally speaking, we consider a short-term rental to be the rental of a dwelling unit or a home for a period of 30 days or less. This differs from a long-term rental, which is typically somebody's primary residence throughout the year, whereas a short-term rental caters to people and families on vacation, typically traveling for less than a month. This leads to long-term rentals being occupied year-round, while short-term rentals are often vacant for a large portion of the year. In Lafayette, our data suggests that short-term rentals were on average rented for 93 days over the past year. Short-term rentals do provide a benefit to the city. One of those benefits is by providing different and often preferable lodging options over traditional hotels. This brings in local spending through tourism and can provide some extra income for residents operating the short-term rental who may otherwise struggle to afford a home in Lafayette. And so while there are numerous benefits to having short-term rentals in a community, there are potential impacts to surrounding residents and potential impacts to the city's housing stock that need to be considered. And so with that in mind, it is helpful to clearly define the issues that we're trying to address before embarking on this public process. Some of those issues that we've identified that this project is seeking to address is first, that even though short-term rentals are not permitted under Lafayette's zoning code, there are dozens in existence today. Just as a little background on that, the city's current zoning regulations permit two types of lodging uses. These are called the hotel, motel, resort, and bed and breakfast uses. These are permitted either by right or through a special review process, and you typically see these in commercial areas. By contrast, short-term rentals are generally found in residential neighborhoods zoned for residential uses. So the city's zoning regulations have not been updated to address short-term rentals, and so as a result, rentals would need to meet the same criteria as the existing allowed lodging uses, which doesn't necessarily work for the business model of a short-term rental. Additionally, the city sales and lodging taxes we're finding are not consistently remitted by the short-term rental operators or the rental platforms, so think sites like Airbnb and VRBO. The locations of rentals are constantly changing, and so maintaining an up-to-date information, data on those rentals remains a real challenge for the city. And then lastly, the city has received periodic complaints from neighbors near short-term rentals, typically about parking noise, maintenance of the rentals, and also we have received some complaints from current rental operators and potential investors about the current prohibition. This is a map showing the locations where bed and breakfasts are allowed through our current zoning regulations, and that is shown in purple. Locations where both bed and breakfasts and hotel motel resorts are allowed are shown in green. The red dots on this map show the approximate locations of short-term rentals that were active between 2019 and early 2022. So the purpose of showing this map is just to highlight that short-term rentals have historically and currently are operating outside of areas where Lafayette has historically anticipated and allowed lodging uses to occur. So we will be focusing on three primary objectives for this project. The first would be the development of new zoning regulations to address short-term rentals. And through this process, we're really focusing on the impact short-term rentals have on the affordability and the availability of housing in Lafayette, as well as how to minimize any disturbances to surrounding properties. The development of these regulations is really the focus of community engagement. And what you'll see in the next few slides, and if you participate in this process, is that we are having a public conversation around different strategies that should be considered when drafting those regulations. So for those unaware, zoning regulations are in essence local laws that govern how land can be used. And the Lafayette City Council has the sole authority to approve changes to any regulations in the city. If council does opt to formally allow short-term rentals in the city through this process, we will then be working to ensure that all the short-term rentals operating in the city are appropriately licensed and paying the applicable taxes. Lastly, we will be creating a multi-departmental coordinated approach for administering and enforcing the new regulations if adopted. So we're proposing a number of strategies relating to both the housing and the neighborhood impacts as part of the new regulations. These strategies were based on some initial community conversations that happened in 2019, just before the start of COVID, as well as research into how some other communities are addressing short-term rentals. I did want to just emphasize that you will have the opportunity through this process to let us know what we're missing, or if we should rethink our approach to any of these strategies. And so in other words, it's just a starting point for this community conversation. We anticipate completing the project in 3 phases. The first phase wrapped up in March and largely included a research of previous community discussions, scoping the project and confirming that scope with City Council. The second phase, defining the direction, will include an engagement window for the months of May and June, and we'll talk just a minute about how to plug into the process. We anticipate spending a good bit of July reflecting on what we've heard through that engagement process, and then visiting with the city's planning commission and city council on this engagement effort, as well as a potential path forward for the project. Once we receive that direction, we will begin drafting the regulations and present those through a community briefing likely in September or October before going through the final adoption process. Any changes to regulations will require a public hearing and recommendation by the city's planning commission and a public hearing and decision by city council. We're using the Lafayette Listens page as an engagement hub for this project, and that page includes a lot of detailed information about the project as well as the strategies that we discussed in this presentation. You'll also have the opportunity to share your thoughts about those strategies through an online questionnaire and share any stories that you have about short-term rentals on the Lafayette Listens page for others to read. There'll also be a link to book one-on-one and small group meetings with city staff, as well as details about some open houses that we'll be hosting in the near future. We are compiling information in what we're calling a briefing book that's included on this page, and that includes a lot of background information, detailed project information, and what we're hearing from the community. There are 2 primary staff members working on this project with the City of Lafayette. First is me, Phil Kleisler, a planner with the city's planning and building department, as well as Kurt Osborne, our sales tax manager. In closing, thank you so much for your interest in the City of Lafayette's short-term rental zoning and licensing project, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.